Hello, I'm Dori Nando. You can catch up with all the fun on the Cosmopolitan Mix and on all our shows via podcast. Just go to My Joy Online podcast and search for your favorite show and relive those moments all over again. Only on Joy 99.7 FM, radio for discerning listeners.
Super Hits Radio, Joy 99.7.
And the conversation we're going to have next has to do with the recent murders. There's been a number of them. And in some instances, it involves some relatives. Anyway, the Abesim one is the very latest one that we have been talking about. The gentleman involved, recently we got to know that they retrieved the murder weapons, what they believe are the murder weapons, some a machete, it was bloodied, and then they also retrieved some intestines. The gentleman has been brought to Accra, and the police CID in Accra has taken over, National Police has taken over the case. But yes, that's the conversation. We want to understand why these things are happening. And yeah, while at it, we also want to, give some advice to parents and people in general on how to stay safe and not to get themselves in harm's way.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do that then. There are different kinds of situations that we're talking about. Obviously, the Abasim murder case will be perhaps completely different from the husbands who have been killing their wives, which has also gone up a lot this year. I think since we started on AM, we've done maybe about 6 or 7 of those stories. So that's also really gone up as well. But anyway, we're going to talk to Seth Asafo. He's a clinical psychologist at the UGMS. Good morning, Seth. It's lovely to talk to you once again.
Hello, good morning. And
Hi, how are you?
Great job you're doing there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's good to see you. So unfortunately, we're not talking about very pleasant things, but we'll do what we can. So let's separate the issues. Let's split the murders into 2 different things, because I suspect that there may be different reasons behind the different kinds of murders. So I'd like to really start with the domestic murders, the ones that are happening when husbands are fighting with their wives. So when wives are fighting with their husbands, and suddenly somebody goes into the bedroom and picks up a gun, and then come and shoots, their spouse, or they go and get a machete and they come and, kill their spouse. And sometimes it's because of infidelity or money, or about how the children are being raised or something, But it's the numbers are going up. And with that, do you think that the numbers are actually going up, or are we just becoming more aware of these things because of technology and the spread of news and stuff? And then also, why are we killing each other? Why are we killing the people we love?
Well, it's a very great question you asked there. And if you ask me about whether the numbers are going up, I think these things have existed for a while, especially if you look at the kind of culture we have, which is a very patriarchal or male-dominated society. Now, it seems to suggest a certain level of submission that people expect from women, and that, in its sense, brings about a lot of tensions or areas where conflicts can arise. And interestingly, one thing that I want to talk about extensively is the effect of emotion. So, you see, usually when people get emotional, the part of the brain they use to actually think or process stuff almost goes to bed. And it seems as if you think about it this way, somebody is challenging my authority, or somebody's done something to me and I'm hurt by it. Now, my conscious mind, or the part of the mind we use for a reason, we call executive function, goes to bed. And sometimes a small part of the brain, the part of the head, we don't even call the conscious part of the brain, but the amygdala, which usually is specialized for identifying fear and helping us flee, takes over. And it can explain why sometimes people develop what I call a temporal insanity when they have such instances of either frustration or anything that basically triggers them, puts them in an emotional state. In an emotional state, emotions drive us more than reason. So it could account for one of the reasons why these things are happening. Now, I would say that society has also had a part to play in all of this, in the way that we basically react to things like this. And from the history and from my experience in practice, none of these things happen in isolation. It's not it happened just once and that was it. No, it would have happened a number of times. But what is usually our response? And the response basically says, oh no, let's pray about it, let's talk about it. And it keeps going on and on. And for some reason, it seems as if a pattern is created for the person who's constantly engaged in this behavior to say that you have nowhere to go, or as it were, you like it. Now, I've had a number of interactions with clients who say they actually do like the fact that their partner would, shove them occasionally because they've done something wrong, because it shows that they care. And it tells you that all these things are reinforcing these behaviors unconsciously. So nobody's intending to do bad, but it's becoming bad and it's causing more problems for us than we had envisioned.
I mean, what would it take for us to change our minds on abuse or on violence? Because I remember that I think a couple of years ago, I was doing a feature on women who were abused, and like you said, a lot of them said, that it's when, in the throngs of passion or anger, he would hit me or move me. It meant I had a certain sort of control over him. I could push him to that point where he would lose control. And so there's definitely that mindset, that we have, which then ultimately makes us stay when we see the red flags of abuse, and then eventually we get killed. How do we change that mindset? And I mean, realistically, how do we change it so that it doesn't get to the point where, your husband goes into a bedroom and picks up a gun and shoots you?
So I think we have work to do on a societal level, on an individual level. So for many people that I've worked with who've been through some form of domestic abuse, there's always a pattern which they do not recognize. The pattern starts from aggression and apology, aggression, apology, aggression and apology. So I'll hit you and beat you up and come and beg you and give you something. And then in your mind, it always seems like he's coming around. Now, the he's coming around component always leaves us to be hopeful. But the reality is, when we look at the evidence provided for people who are, as it were, abusers, they hardly change. And so making a quick call early is important. Now, on a societal level also, the way that perhaps the family responds or the religious response to the way that abuses happen is something we need to also look at. Because I noticed that with many of the people I have worked with, the church, I'm a Christian, so I can speak a lot about the church. The church would interfere and say, pray about it. Or they say, no, don't worry, it will be fine. He's under some spiritual attack, demonic attack. Until the person dies, nobody sees that it's serious. Right. So the response we should be taking, and like we say, the first thing or the first response is safety. Get them out of that environment where the abuse is occurring or where the whatever is occurring, because that is the only way you can also build the person. Now, if you look at the pattern that's created, abusers tend to take away the self-esteem of the people they abuse, to the point that the person who's being abused feels like they can't do anything without their abuser. Right. And so that pattern that is created sometimes makes people ask questions like, but why didn't you leave? And we make it seem so simple. Yeah. But the way that the human mind is, when you're conditioned to react in a certain way, you almost always react that way. Okay. And sometimes, the people around you will also move away just because they've seen it. They're saying, you're being stupid, you're being silly. And they get tired of staying close to you. And the isolation in itself bonds you even more to the abuser and makes things worse off. And that's part of the reason why it keeps going on. And sometimes people feel like, I just have to embrace what this is because I can't do anything about it. Okay. My family's neglected me, everybody else. But I think the response that we get socially is something we need to look at, especially from the religious perspective and then the family context.
Okay. Seth, so is it ever the case where a man goes from never showing any signs of aggression or abuse? Never. So gentle, kind, loving husband. Does it ever go from that and just escalates into one day we had a fight and he killed me? Or are there always signs that you can look out for and always?
There are always signs. There are always signs. Let's not forget this. When you look at the typical abuser, the reason why they actually can get someone to even, let me say, fall in love with them or marry them is because they're so cunning. Okay, so they come in like your prince, the most amazing gentleman you've ever met. and they'll normally give you a story about how they were abused when they were little, and they have a lot of emotional baggage that they're dealing with, etc., etc., etc. So in a way, you already pity them, or you're feeling for them. You're saying, this is a broken gentleman. So then it starts off with little comments. It normally doesn't start off physically, okay? In many cases, when you look at the pattern of abuse, it would start either verbally or emotionally manipulating the person, and then getting them to isolate from people who might draw the attention to the fact that they're being abused. Now, as the verbal abuses go, you'll see one day you are yanked, you are thrown, your hair is pulled out, and there's a quick apology and a making up. And then it seems like, oh, he's broken. It's because that's what he was. Then the physical and the sexual abuse, they come together. Now, the ultimate essence of abuse is control. So if I'm trying to control you, anytime I say something or I want us to do something that you disagree with, it means I haven't been able to get you in my control. So I need to, as it were, shape you to get there. And that's where the extreme forms of abuse come in, especially for women who are very assertive or are confident. I mean, I want us to understand this. Regardless of who you are and where you are in society, you can be abused. Many people think, I hear lots of people say things like, I would never allow myself to do this. Nobody comes and says, hello, I'm an abuser, I'm here to abuse you. Nobody does that.
Yeah.
It's a pattern. And as the pattern is created, you fall in the pattern and then you start to suffer for it.
And how difficult it is when the person that is abusing you is someone you love so deeply. We find a way to make excuses for people, don't we?
Definitely. Now, we rationalize because we cannot accept, or so many people are in a denial. We call those defense mechanisms. So they deny the fact that another human being who cares about them, who basically married them, has makes love to them, etc., can do these things to them. So they need to find excuses, or their sanity will be threatened. And that's why many people, they tend to rationalize a lot by making excuses, because to accept that this fine gentleman who in church is always preaching, or who is so loved by everyone, can actually slap me and beat me and throw me and do all these things. So it's just our way of preventing ourselves from what we call a sensory overload. People rationalize or deny the fact that it's an abuse and make an alternate explanation of, oh, they're just people who are troubled, or there are people who are going through their own challenges.
Okay, sure.
Now, I would also want us to get into the minds of the people who, the perpetrators, for a moment. Now, these people, what informs or what gets into their mind? How do they move from, or what makes them think that they can commit these crimes and get away with it? I know that, yes, they're largely driven by rage, but don't they consider the consequences?
Well, I mean, they are not largely driven by rage. If you look at the pattern of abuse, it's almost something that people, I don't want to say they think about, but they want to get control, okay? And they'll do it in the most cunning of ways. So it's a pattern of behavior. So it's almost like it's something you think about. How do I manage this? How do I get people away from her? How do I keep her, beat her up and still keep her at home? Things like that. So one, I make sure that you have no economic, you're not able to, you're deprived economically. You have to basically depend on me, etc., etc., etc. Now, you'll be interested to find that in one of the researches that we did, we had women who were being abused. We took them out of the abused relationships and we put them in another setting. And then they started to ask us questions like, so now when I want to engage in sex, what do I do? And it's like they get into that zone where it's so difficult for you to reach them. And in many of these instances, if we're not around them, if people are not constantly telling them, no, this is not right, this is not right, this is not right, it becomes problematic. Many abusers can make you doubt who you are. They can say something and you'll say, but you said this. They say, no, I didn't. And people start to wonder, is everything okay with me? Which is a a very common presentation.
All right.
And they know how to push your buttons. So it's like they're gaslighting you consistently to react in a way that allows them to also do what they're doing. So you can get so angry and you may shout, and the shouting means, why are you shouting? So that's a slap. So it's not entirely by rage. Now, the rage component comes because you are not getting the person to follow in the way you're looking for it. And it makes you feel inferior. And if you look at many abusers, they have an inferiority complex, okay? And that's why the inferiority complex is one of the reasons why in many abuse situations, way after the partner has left them or separated them, the abuser can actually kill the person because the control they have over you is all they have. And once you take that away from them by moving away, they have nothing else. And I don't know, a couple of, was it months ago, there was this issue in the US about a pastor who had killed the partner. It was the same situation. She left and he said, I will kill you. And actually did that because he doesn't have anything but that person. And the control gives him a sense of being, a sense of purpose. So if I can't control you, then what do I have? Nothing. And that's one of the reasons why they get frustrated, and frustration predisposes them to aggressive behavior.
All right, so we've looked at the aspect where the domestic setting where people, you're having partners abuse each other, so spouses are abusing each other. But let's also
just before you move to, you're moving to Abasim, right? Yeah, okay. So just before you move to Abasim, just one final question for you, Seth. And we've talked about being the victim. Now, what about if somebody's watching to us and they are actually the abuser? So what if you start to see these things in yourself? You feel the aggression, the rage, you're hitting, you're slapping, you're pushing, you're shoving. What do you do?
Well, there's always help out there. And the most important thing is to reach out to somebody. You see, sometimes we get caught up in our own minds to the point that we normalize the things we do and we consider them the norm. Now, it takes an outsider to point out to you that it's not the norm, it's your norm. So talking to people about it is the number one step. Of course, these people may not have all the requisite skills to help you, but they can definitely push you or direct you to a professional. And I would encourage that if you're looking for a professional, you have clinical psychologists, you have counseling psychologists, basically look for a licensed practitioner. You can even go to a general medical setting and talk to a medical doctor about it, who will make the necessary referrals. So if you find that you have a problem, reach out. I mean, today, thanks to the internet, we have many of such blogs where you can go to the blog and type these things you're experiencing, and you're going to get a resource or some person who might be able to start guiding you to come out of it. But it's a very long process. That is the fact of it.
All right, we move on to the Abasim murders and the Kaswa incident, where we're having teenagers being killed, and some teenagers also being involved in the perpetration of some of these crimes. Is there a psychological issue here?
Well, to some extent, but I would say this comes from a place of learning, okay? And you see, when it comes to learning, we learn both consciously and unconsciously every day in our lives. People may look at learning from the perspective of, I'm actually going to study something, but there are so many cues that society leaves for us. Now, if you look at our current world, the monetization of many things is one of the things that we're learning. And we're basically forgetting that before you can achieve that status, you have to put in the work. So I've basically looked on, I'm currently doing some research in gambling. And when you look at gambling, specifically with sports betting, and you ask yourself, what is happening? Look at the number of sports betting companies that we have in our country today. Yeah. What message is it sending out? So you see, from a perspective of what we call symbolic interaction, people make meanings of things around them. Now, if I'm seeing so many gambling avenues, what it says is that perhaps that's the avenue to make wealth. So what's the essence of school? And we're basically taking away the process. So somebody wants to jump from A to Z, which usually is not the case. It doesn't happen. So I'm taking these subtle meanings. I'm learning unconsciously that that's the way to go. So what method or however I get there is not a big deal. So it comes from a place of learning. I mean, the adverts that we see, the commercials on get rich, there's a whoever here who can make you rich. And these things are aired. So if they are being aired, for some reason, it's justified or it falls within the norm of society. So it's not a big deal. Now, if you can allow me to advertise that I do whatever to give you some resources, and then I come to you and you're asking me for the ingredients for it. Basically, society accepts it in a way from symbolic interactions, and that says that we make meanings of the things that happen around us. So we're inclined to accept that it's not a big deal. I mean, people making so much wealth, and nobody ever questions them. How did you make this wealth?
Yeah.
And it tells you see, all these things are giving the wrong impression. I know that in the past, if you came home with something, I mean, even a phone, your parents would ask you, where did you get the phone? You're not working. How can you even afford a phone? And that was not at 3310. But today, you come home with a massive car, you have a house, and you're not working, but nobody seems to say anything about it. So it is giving an impression that it's okay, even though it's wrong. And nobody's going to question you, or nobody's going to hold you up to it. So from my perspective, there's a learning that's going on, which is largely unconscious, but it's what is actually propelling these things forward.
When you talk about that learning, it gives me the impression that it looks like we're headed, for doom, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Thankfully, because it's learning, there's also unlearning. And unlearning means that we need to bring back the moral core of who we are as a people. We need to look out for each other. We need to do that social check-in. When we were younger, if you did something bad in your vicinity or your neighborhood, before your parents came home, you had been disciplined by Auntie Yai or Fakujo before your parents will come and discipline you. Today, do we still have that? No. Because if you basically do that to somebody's child, you're going against, I don't know what it is. But we are not doing our member check-in. We're not helping each other. And social media, or let me say the internet, is one of such tools that is propagating the concept of success without hard work. Of course, yes, there are aspects of it that people talk about their lives, about hard work. But lots of children I'm working with today are either wanting to do music or go into acting because, the fabulous life they see about among these people seems to suggest that's the way to go. And that's why I say the moral core of society is being shaken gradually. And there are so many creeping compromises that we're having to deal with. And we're not noticing how these things are affecting us. Now, from a perspective of learning and unlearning, we can still create a learning avenue for the children who are yet to develop into the stage. We can say these ones will die out, but we need to provide context for our children. And that's, for me, the way to go. Context, hard work, and make it practical. So even if I want to give my child something, I'm going to make them feel like they worked for it, rather than just hand it to them and then they feel like, life, you should have things given to you. We need to do it in words and in actions. That is the only way we can rip our society of these kinds of things.
So who's supposed to do this unlearning that you're talking about? Because from what you say, going back to those days when other parents or everybody else was checking on the child in the neighborhood, it's unrealistic to think that we can go back to those days.
Definitely. We might not be able to do that through and through. But as our culture moves away from before what it was, interdependent in nature, okay, to very individualistic. So we're looking at our immediate families. The onus now falls on us in the immediate family to put context for the children in many of these things. So you're watching television, you're seeing betting, sports betting. Of course, put context to it and say, oh yeah, they do these things. However, the chances of winning are A, B, C, D. People have engaged it. They've done 1, 2, 3. There are people who have gone to jail. You're giving them context so that they don't take the advert as it is or the commercial to mean that it's just there. Now, there's so much work to be done on different fronts, from the school, from the church, from the individuals. Everybody needs to be a part of this approach to changing the narrative of what success is.
Well, yes, it's a tall order. I believe it's going to be really difficult to get to do this, but, well, we'll have to try. And I believe the parents have a huge responsibility because most of it rests with them. If you're leaving it to the schools, there may be a few schools, but most of our schools are challenged, especially when it comes to, the public schools.
Seth, just another quick question for you.
Yes.
Has to do with our children, So, I mean, I'm thinking, okay, how do we instill a healthy sense of awareness of risk, in them without traumatizing them, or like you say, sensory overload. So overloading our children with the burden of their safety. So you want to teach them, when you go out, don't talk to this person, or don't do this, or don't do that, or don't do that. But how do you actually do that kind of,
Okay.
You get what I mean, right?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. And see, a lot of the times I've been saying that necessity is usually the mother of inventions. And if you look at the trait of resilience, that helps people to basically face life and advance despite adversity. It's not something that is learned. Well, it's learned in theory, but I can't come and teach you resilience. Sometimes you have to just allow people to go through things to learn from them. That's not saying that I can see that there's fire and I ask my child to go and put their hands in the fire. I can guide the child there and say, no, fire is hot, so don't touch fire. But sometimes we try to be a little overprotective. Now, being overprotective does not allow children to develop the necessary mental fortitude to persevere in the face of challenges. So when you start to face challenges, basically you're looking for an immediate coping, like how somebody would use alcohol to mask their emotional pain. That is a maladaptive coping because it brings about other problems. But being able to face it and not use alcohol and feel the pain of what you're going through will not kill you. And it builds a resilience which allows you to, in endeavors in other facets of your life. So we need to help them to take calculated risk. We need to allow our children to be autonomous as we guide from a distance. There are things that you need to guide there and then and interrupt because it's dangerous and it can lead to, demise or, whatever it is. But sometimes we need to allow them to struggle a little for them to build resilience and notice that even without these things, life can still go on.
Gosh, that sounds difficult, even for adults. I mean, how much more for children? But also, I mean, since we're talking about children, let me just bring you into a conversation I was having a couple of days ago with a friend about our children and social media. So, for example, our children are on TikTok, they're on Instagram Reels, they're on all these things, And the kids, they know how to bypass the 18 plus thingy, and, they'll have accounts that you don't know about and all of that. So I had a parent say, I'm taking away my kid's phone, I'm shutting down their social media accounts. I'm doing all of that, and the arguments became, do you leave them to navigate this social media world, which we are not perhaps as conversant with as they are? Or do you shut them off? Are you delaying the inevitable? I mean, how do you deal with it?
So it depends on every child, okay? But mostly we have a number of approaches. First of all is being able to censor the kinds of places they go to. And we have apps that help us to do that. Like, for example, the Cyber Nanny allows you to basically mark out. So if I install it on my kid's device and I have the parent device, okay, I can tell wherever my child has browsed, which sites and etc. And if I have, and I always say that it's good to sign contracts with your children now. So whatever you have, the device, the tablet, the computer, is just a privilege. It's not a right. And so if you misuse it, I'm taking it away for 2 days, which is depriving you of stimulation. Now, if we're able to do these kinds of things, it will manage it to some extent. Sometimes, if you notice that perhaps this may be problematic, I encourage the use of what I call communal phones. So there's one phone or one tablet which all the kids use at home. So you cannot
Do you want
personalize
peace
it.
in your house or you don't want peace in your house? Shared
That's
phones,
the point.
communal
You see,
phones.
the truth is, in the beginning, it's a challenge. But if you're resolute about it, they will follow. It's either that or it's nothing. We are usually not afraid. We're usually afraid of pushing the boundaries because we are so concerned about how they will feel. But think about it.
No, we
The
are
phone is
concerned
still
about
there.
our peace of mind. We're not concerned about
Ah,
how they would feel.
so that becomes a maladaptive coping because you're thinking about your peace of mind.
Of
So
course,
does
I
peace
get
of
that.
mind mean you can watch TV for the rest of your life? Definitely not. You see, as children, we need to get them to do the things they need to do. Because if you look at the way their personality is, they are always looking for things that offer pleasure. And if you allow a child to always engage in the pleasurable activities, sadly, they won't get anywhere in life.
Okay, get it. Okay, I think that's it for me.
Oh,
You?
okay, so I still want us to come back to the perpetrators and the people who are
Yes.
involved in some of these things. Do you get a sense that because people do or commit some of these crimes and get away with them, it encourages others, or there are no consequences for many people, and so they feel that they can, because we're looking at the stats and there's been what, 333 murders and very few of them have been resolved. Is that also part of the problem?
Definitely. And that's part of the symbolic interactionism I mentioned, that people learn. We make meanings out of things that happen. And so if somebody's gotten away with it, I can also get away with it. It's human nature. We learn by observing. So if we're able to, as it were, block all these avenues and people could see that engaging in this would actually bring about such consequences, it might not entirely eliminate the behavior, but it would make people rethink if they want to engage in the behavior in the first place. And then as we add the other measures of like public education, bringing back our moral core, the norms, like the moral, the norms back to society, then they all play a role in shaping people to sort of move away from these kinds of things. And I think the school, the churches have become very significant agents of socialization. And they need to help for all these things to be reinstated back into our society, or else we will deplete our morality.
Staying with the perpetrators, you sometimes hear that someone has committed some murder or some crime and then they tend to regret it. Maybe they struck their partner and killed them, and then subsequently they are regretting it. Is it in all cases that they regret, or for, some people just feel that, yeah, they don't feel anything at all?
Well, in many instances, we say that people may regret it, but if the behavior becomes consistent, they forget it. That aspect of it goes away. Okay, so with many behaviors, the first time may cause unsettlement because it's changed and it's new. I mean, I've seen several people see an accident, and when they see like the sight of blood, you see people cringe and all of that. It's because it's new, it's novel, and we have what we call mirror neurons in our mind that basically are able to tell discomfort among people. Okay, now if I am constantly seeing these things, and that's perhaps one of the things that happens with the hospitals. We sometimes go to the hospital and you're saying, they're not even reacting. They've seen it so much, they become habituated to it. So if someone is doing it so consistently and they say they regretted it, I'm a bit skeptical about that. But somebody does it once and they suddenly just realize no, because they are feeling within themselves a sense of guilt. Because their mirror neurons are saying this causes pain. And you basically you are feeling the same pain you think the person would have gone through. So, like, I actually really do check. If I ask a question about how would you feel if somebody went through a situation like this, the reactions that people gives me an impression of how they are able to empathize with people. So you can tell almost directly. So sometimes people may feel guilty, but if they've done this severally, the guilt goes away. It becomes normal. They become habituated.
All right, thank you very much, Setho Safo. Setho Safo is a clinical psychologist at UGMS. We appreciate your time with us
You're
this
most welcome.
morning. Yes, and interesting conversations. And some of the things he's talked about, the unlearning bits, and I'm wondering, can we actually do this unlearning thing?
Unlearning
It sounds like it's actually impossible.
It's difficult to unlearn things, very difficult, because a lot of these things become like reflex actions, the way that you react to certain things and stuff. But if you're intentional, then yes, you know, everything is about being intentional, about watching your reactions, about being present in the moment and choosing, you know, always choosing. So for example, I have anxiety. I have very bad anxiety. And I'm having to unlearn and relearn my anxiety reactions. So it requires that in every moment you are very present, that you learn to identify the things that are triggering the anxiety, that you're able to, at the point, choose peace over anxiety. You know what I mean? Or choose one thought over another. So it takes a lot of intentionality, but you kind of realize that as time goes by, the process gets shorter. You kind of go through the process, and then, you know, you're like, okay, I'm all right. And then, so it's definitely, you know, it's definitely a process. But in everything, you know, once you're committed to yourself, you're committed to growing and learning, everything is possible. That's the beauty of being human.
You see, the thing is, individually, we may be interested in wanting to reform or to unlearn. But if you're looking at a whole society where so many people have learned, you know, I don't think we can achieve this if people individually want to do this.
It would be easier if we could all agree that we want to unlearn and then unlearn. The main problem is that there'll be a group of people who want to unlearn, and there'll be a group of people who don't recognize the need to unlearn. So for example, if we take the church, there are some doctrines that some churches stick to passionately, and some churches are a little bit more lax, you know, with it. We will never reach a consensus because fundamentally there's a disagreement in whether it is right or whether it's wrong or whether it should be unlearned or not. But if two people agree, or if a group of people agree to enforce change, then change is possible.
Okay, otherwise, let's just make sure we're enforcing our laws.
Oh, that too, yes.
to get everybody else to know that, no, I think that's the way for everybody to unlearn.
Regardless of how you feel, you do not do this, you do not do this, these are the consequences, and you can't bribe your way out of it. Love that. Okay. So that was our conversation. We're moving on to another one right after the break. We'll be talking about our COVID-19 cases and why you need to adhere to the protocols. We know that about 83 people have died in the Bono region, which is pretty serious. The Bono East had their numbers going down. It's not the same for the Bono region, which is a little bit concerning. Our numbers have gone up, like Israel was saying yesterday, which means that fundamentally we're not adhering to protocols. Even though, you know, there's no funerals, indoor funerals, and the government have put in place some issues or some structures to help us do that. So we'll have that conversation.
Yes. There are also the people who are wondering, okay, so they've had the first dose of the AstraZeneca and they're wondering, when are we going to get the second dose? And there are many others who are also wondering, okay, so when can we ever get even our first dose? Or our jab? And so we're going to have that conversation with Dr. Kwame Amponsah-Chan, who's a program manager for the expanded program on immunization at the Ghana Health Service.
Also, Israel, excuse me, did you know that there are also people who still do not actually believe in the vaccination? I was having a conversation with a gentleman yesterday who said, no. He thought that the vaccine is actually the mark of the beast.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we had a long
Yeah,
conversation
those two.
about that.
Okay.
Yeah, there are those two. So maybe we can,
Yeah.
put that in somewhere at some point.
So do stay tuned in. We'll be back with that in a bit.